Remember this.
You have to take off the things that have been added over time. So you have to peel away the English, you have to peel away the Latin, you have to peel away the Greek, you have to peel away anything else.
So let's talk about anything else. The first thing I would like to do in this video is to talk about two languages that are considered a part of modern Hebrew that really are not. The first one is modern Hebrew and the second one is Aramaic. I want to talk about these because there's a lot of confusion, a lot of misnomers going on, and I would just like to make things clear to the audience. But first, let's take a look at a language map and I can show you what I'm talking about. All right, so looking at this map, you see in the green area, this is the area that Scriptural Hebrew actually comes from. It was in the language family of the Hamido-Semitic. These days they call it Afro-Asiatic. And this is the origin and the birthplace of Scriptural Hebrew. Now you'll see in the black spot is a Balto-Slavic language. And what I hope to show you today is how Hebrew went from a Semitic language, an Afro-Asiatic language, into a Balto-Slavic language that we know today, and that is called by the name of modern Hebrew. All right, so from this point forward, I am going to call what's known as modern Hebrew. I'm going to change the term to modern Israeli to keep confusion down. So Hebrew of the Bible will be Scriptural Hebrew, and modern Hebrew will be Israeli. Now, this list that you see here, this is a list, and this is in order from greatest to least influence of modern Israeli. You have Yiddish, Aramaic, Arabic, Ladino, and Yemeni Hebrew. We're going to talk about the first two, Yiddish and Aramaic, and show you their influence because they make up the greatest portion of what's called modern Hebrew. We'll start with the Yiddish. So if you don't know, Yiddish is actually a component of two languages. The first one being Hebrew, and then the second one being a Sorbian, which is a Slavic/Germanic type language. Let's start with the Hebrew first. So I'm going to talk about the kingdom of Khazaria, which existed between 700 and 1200 AD. And I'm going to use two books. The 13th Tribe by Arthur Kessler, and the second book is The Invention of the Jewish People by Shlomo Sands, to explain how we get the conversion. All right, so as you know, the kingdom of Khazaria started in 700 AD, but at around 900 AD, the Khazarian kingdom converted to Judaism because they were trying to remain an independent Muslim caliphate on one side of them, and they had the Holy Roman Empire on the other side of them. So they were literally stuck between choosing to be a Muslim or a Christian, and they chose Judaism instead. Now, although the Khazars customs of Hebrew, they themselves were not of Semitic origin. So, according to them, their ancestral lineage, the Khazars claim to be sons of Japheth or Japheth through his grandson Togarmah, and we'll look at that in Genesis 10, verses 2 and 3. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Yaum, Thabal, Meshach, and Thayaris. And the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Rehapath, and Togarmah. So, as you see, Japheth, his son Gomer, and his son Togarmah. So as you see the lineage here, we have Enoch, whose son was Japheth, who his son was Gomer, and his son was Togarmah. And the Khazars say that Togarmah had 10 sons, and one of their names was Khazar, where they get their name from. Now, at the end of this kingdom, which was around 1250 AD, they were defeated by Russian invaders. So the exiles from the Khazarian kingdom, they drifted into different lands: Russia, Lithuania, Poland, Germany, and also in Kosler's book, he uses a quote from A.M. Poliak's book titled Khazaria. The descendants of this settlement, those who stayed where they were, those who were immigrated to the United States and to other countries, and those who went to Israel, constitute now the large majority of world Jewry. So, taking another look at the language map, you see there's a little bit of a change. So we have the green and we have the black, but in the blue, you see where they converted to Judaism. And then at the end of their empire, they pretty much, many of the people, the Khazarians, moved towards what is called the Holy Roman Empire in Middle Ages. And this is where they take on the second portion of the language, which we're actually going to get to right now. So I finished the Hebrew, and now we're going to go on and talk about the Sorbian language. So here we go. So, as stated in the last section, the Khazars relocated to several Eastern European countries, Poland, Germany, Lithuania, after the fall of their empire in the 13th century. The largest populations moved into Poland in particular, where Kessler describes, "We have seen from the early days of the Piast dynasty under Casimir the Great that everything was done to attract immigrants, to colonize the land and build modern cities." So Sand, in his book, he agrees when he quotes Salo Baron, "Here they met other Jewish groups. Together with these arrivals from Germany and the Balkans, they began laying the foundations for a Jewish community, especially in 16th century Poland. Many of the towns that the Jewish people moved to were built and ruled by German immigrants. So the new Jewish populace had to learn German in order to advance themselves into society. Is what German language did the Jews have to learn to move up in that society? In The Schizoid Nature of Modern Hebrew, a Slavic language in search of a Semitic past by Paul Wexler, he states, "I'm not convinced by the view that Yiddish by birth is a Germanic language. On the contrary, I believe that Yiddish was derived from Judeo-Sorbian when Judeo-Sorbian speakers made a partial language shift to German between the 9th and 13th centuries." So many German immigrants in Poland spoke the Serbian language. Sorbian is an Eastern German Slavic language that was carried by these immigrants to Poland. During the next 2 to 3 centuries, both languages, Sorbian and Hebrew, were used to create the Yiddish language. Kessler, in his book, explains Yiddish is a curious amalgam of Hebrew, medieval German, Slavonic, and other elements written in Hebrew characters. Wexler surmises the motivation to keep Yiddish as a semi-separate language not into German. However, a full identification with culture was avoided since one, Germanization was tantamount to Christianization. The Jews, too, may not have had access to native speakers of German who they could emulate, and or 3, they may have purposely not emulated standard German norms in order to preserve a separate linguistic profile. So looking back at the components of Israeli, we talked about Yiddish, we talked about the Hebrew and the Sorbian. So now that we're finished with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to the Aramaic side and show how that also should not be considered a part of Scriptural Hebrew. Now, the definition of Aram in H758 is to be high or elevated. He was also the 5th son of Shem, and the portion of for Aram was the high portion, named after him, where his descendants lived. Now, Later, it was to be conquered by the descendants of his brother Ashur, also known as Assyria, who was the second son of Shem. And you can find those verses in Genesis 10, verses 11 and 22. Now, despite what most people think, Aram pertains to Syria and a part of ancient Mesopotamia. Most people think it's just the country today, but no, it contained both. And here's a map. So the orange section is the Assyrian, but where you see the city of Amida, that was a portion of Syria, and also where the Hittites are on the map. That too was considered a portion of Syria back in scriptural biblical days. So, Aramaic, as far as the language, can be broken into three time frames: ancient, 800 to 500 BC, imperial, 500 to 200 BC, and middle, which is also called Syriac, which was from 200 to 1400 AD. And we'll look in. So it's in the imperial phase that Aramaic was spread throughout the Assyrian Empire. During this time, the Assyrians had conquered Babylon, Aram, Yasharal, Canaan, and Egypt. And during this time, the king decided that Aramaic would be the international language or the royal language. And that's how many people across many countries began to use it. Now, it was during this time that Yasharel was conquered and sent into exile. And it was during the exile that they decided to go ahead and change from the Hebrew to Aramaic language and the script. So, here's an example of Hebrew, and you all use this a lot in the videos. This is Hebrew proper. All right, now this next is Aramaic. And I put them side by side because I want you to see the difference. That square writing that we use today, that people say that that's modern Hebrew, it's not. It's an Assyrian/Aramaic writing, and it's not to be considered the same thing. And I just wanted you to see that side by side. So, what is the impact of Aramaic in Scripture itself? Well, according to John Alger in his book, A Short Grammar of Biblical, he states that Aramaic accounts for only 250 verses out of a total of 23,000. The impact is that Aramaic is about 1% of Scripture. So, despite what we're being told today, it's not really that significant. So, we are told that Aramaic and Hebrew are the same thing. And we're also told that Aramaic was spoken by the Hebrews up to the time of Yahusha. So in Daniel 2, 1 through 4, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, where his spirit was troubled, and his sleep went away from him. And the king commanded to call all the magicians and the astrologers and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before King Nebuchadnezzar. And the king said to them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. Then spoke the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we shall show the interpretation of it. Now, that word Syriac is the word Aramia, which is the proper term for what we call Aramaic today. Aramia is the actual language. Aramaic, that's what we say today. So in Isaiah 36:11, we can see definitively that there's a difference between the Hebrew and Aramaic language. Then said Eliakim and Shebna and Joah unto Rabshakeh, Speak, I pray you, unto your servants in the Syrian language, for we understand it, and speak not to us in the Jews' language, in the ears of the people that are on the wall. So the Syrian language, again, is a completely different than the Jews' language. That word Jew is the word YHUHderek, and you can please look at my video, Should Hebrew be called Hebrew? And here are some other verses too. Scripture shows that Hebrew and Aramaic are two different languages. What about being used by the Hebrews during the time of Yahusha? Well, we'll get into that right now. Luke 4:16-20. And he, Yahusha, came to Nazareth where he had been brought up. And as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on a Shabbat day and stood up to read. And there was delivered to him the book of the prophet Isaiah. When he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of Yahuwah is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering the sight of the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of Yahuwah." And he closed the book and gave it again to the minister and sat down. And the eyes of all of them that were in the synagogue were fastened on him. Now, the reason why they were looking at him stunned, number one, he actually said the word Yahuwah. Okay, so, and he also, I wanted to show this to show that he was speaking Hebrew. He read out of the Hebrew text of Yeshayahu or Isaiah. And here's where you can find the original scripture that he spoke. But it was in Hebrew, in the Hebrew letters, and he used that and he said it. Now, as far as using Yahweh's name, it was against to use Yahweh's name. So let's look at another verse, John 7:14 and 15. Now about in the midst of Yahusha went up to the temple and taught. And the Jews marveled, how does this man know the letters, having never learned? In this verse, letters are both the Hebrew letters as far as the alphabet and the books of the Old Testament. Learned has to do with learning scripture from the Pharisees and the tribes. So Yahusha, this verse is used to show that Yahusha understood Hebrew text, Hebrew interpretation, and letters without the permission of the Pharisees and the scribes in their form of learning. So Aramaic / Syrian, it did come back into use around 200 AD. That's when the Talmud began to be written. And there were two, the Jerusalem and the Babylonian ones. And it was used to preserve oral Torah teachings. But ultimately, it was the Babylonian Talmud. That must be a Freudian slip. That won favor, and it's in this version that is used to create modern Israeli in the 1880s. And I want to show you that Aramaic's imprint affects us more today than it did back in scriptural times, and especially during the time of exile in what's called the Old Testament. And I really want you to get that in mind, that Aramaics, we're told something, but the evidence is a little bit different. So let's, right now, I want to get into today, more modern history. So let's take a look. Eliezer Ben-Yehuda. Known as the father of modern Israeli, Ben-Yehuda started reconstructing Israeli, along with others, during the Zionist movement to form a nation for Jewish people beginning in the 1880s. He used many languages to help form modern Israeli: Ladino, Arabic, Yiddish and Hebrew, Scriptural Hebrew, Aramaic, and it's the Aramaic from the Talmud specifically, the Babylonian Talmud. Wexler states in his book that the Israeli revivalists tapped two Semitic languages as major sources of lexical and morphological enrichment of modern Hebrew: Arabic and most of all Aramaic. And remember, it's the Aramaic from the Babylonian Talmud. He goes on to say the adoption of an Arabic-Aramaic corpus by modern Hebrew could not promote the recovery of old Hebrew norms. So by adopting Arabic and Aramaic, they couldn't continue with scriptural Hebrew. On the contrary, the reliance of these languages, especially Aramaic, only served, one, to dilute even further the Semitic Hebrew profile of modern Hebrew, and two, to accelerate the process of merging Hebrew and Aramaic components. Accelerate the process of merging Hebrew and Aramaic components. So this is where you get the Aramaic influence. So how much scriptural Hebrew is in modern Israeli? Which I think is a very good question. In the book Esperanto and Its Rivals, Roberto Garvio writes, Eliezer Ben-Yehuda used 8,000 biblical Hebrew words and 24,000 Aramaic words for modern Hebrew. And for those of you who don't know, Esperanto is a language of diplomacy for other countries to be able to converse, diverse countries. And it is derived off of modern Hebrew. Using Garvio's numbers, Scriptural Hebrew makes up about a third of the words Ben-Yehuda used to form modern Israeli. A third. Not half, just a third. Now, for these next numbers I'm going to present, it's important to remember that the Mishnah, which comes from the Babylonian Talmud, which began to be written in Middle Aramaic, also called Syriac, around 200 AD. And please look up the phrase Katav Ashuri. That will come a little bit later. Wexler quotes some other linguist estimations of Scriptural Hebrew usage in modern Israeli. The statistics given by Even Shoshan for his dictionary are revealing. Slightly over 16,000 words of biblical Mishnaic origin versus almost 21,000 words of medieval and modern origin. Approximately 57% of contemporary Hebrew lexicon consists of non-Semitic Hebraicisms. Shoshan uses Shemitic languages, Aramaic and Hebrew, as a divider of modern and ancient language. I will take his statistics and isolate Scriptural Hebrew from the rest to show the true percentage of its use in modern Israeli. So we're going to take those 16,000 biblical Mishnaic words. We're going to say half, about half of them is Hebrew. Scriptural Hebrew. We'll take the other half and add it to the 21,000 of the other words that was used to form. So in other words, 8,000 words for biblical Hebrew and 29,000 for Aramaic, medieval, and modern Israeli. That means that biblical Hebrew is 27% of modern Israeli. And I would like you to keep in mind, these are my estimations using his numbers to isolate Hebrew. So this is not something that he quoted or Wexler quoted. I'm just using the statistics given to show what biblical Hebrew or Scriptural Hebrew, how much of it, very little of it, is used in modern Israeli. So by the numbers, Garvio said 33% of Israeli is Scriptural Hebrew. Wexler Shoshan said 27% of Israeli is Scriptural Hebrew. That means for Garvio, 67% of Israeli is non-Hebrew. Wexler Shoshan is worse. 73% of Israeli is non-Hebrew. So I want you to think about that. As people go around and say modern Hebrew is a continuation of Scriptural Hebrew, not really. There's very little of it. You're talking about anywhere from a quarter of the language to up to a third of the language has Scriptural Hebrew in it. To me, that's shocking, and I want to know why they would even say that it was a continuation when it barely has any in it. It's not even half. And this is why they actually knew. In two quotes, Wexler states the language revivalists knew Israeli was not a continuation of Scriptural Hebrew. And I want you to get this down and really think about this. There are three factors contributing to the belief of the revivalists and most contemporary native speakers that modern Hebrew is a resurrected colloquial form of biblical and Mishnaic Hebrew. Number one, the overwhelming majority of modern Hebrews have cognates in pre-revival stages. 2, language revival is propagated by educators and normative grammarians alike. 3, modern Hebrew and Hebrew are called by the identical glottonym. That means that they have the same word identifications. Second quote, the failure to produce a Semitic grammar and phonotactics for modern Hebrew, while a source of disappointment, never led the revivalists to doubt the possibility of a language revival. They maintained that if the grammar of modern Hebrew differed sharply from those of biblical Mishnaic Hebrew, the cause was to be sought in the negligence of language planners and native speakers alike. The latter were allegedly able to re-education. You are willing to forego what is the truth to adopt what they tell you is the truth. Re-education, folks. That is what all of us are doing. So I want to go back and look at this map one last final time. Again, you see the original Hebrew language. We know that it transferred to medieval Europe. Yiddish was adopted, some Germanic was adopted. It was changed from the Holy Roman Empire. Then it was transplanted back to Yasharel during the 1900s with the creation of the state or the nation of Israel. So what you have really is a Balto-Slavic Aramaic language. So in summary, I hope that I was able to show you that Hebrew changed into Israeli language, both geographically and linguistically. How very little of the Hebrew is contained in Israeli today. And that Scriptural Hebrew is a completely different language than modern day Israeli. It is not Yiddish, that's not Hebrew. It is not Sorbian, that's not Hebrew. It's not Aramaic. And that's the bulk of Israeli today. And you need to understand that Scriptural Hebrew has very little part to play in that. And I hope that you understand that, grasp that concept, and to stop and recognize what you're doing. Because, what we're doing and what we're saying, it creates confusion, not only for ourselves, but also others. Also, in summary, it would be good that Israeli should no longer be called modern Hebrew. It's a misnomer, and again, it causes confusion. I also hope that the square letters that was used in Israeli should be called Assyrian/Babylonian. Jewish people call it Katav Ashuri. That's Assyrian language. It was accumulated from the Babylonian Talmud. That's why I've always called it Babylonian writing. But lastly, I hope that this makes you think about what you're trying to pursue when you're trying to pursue Yahuwah and his scriptures. What are you really trying to do? Are you trying to pursue Jewish traditions, or are you trying to pursue scripture? You will find, if you sit and really think about it, that those are two distinct, different, and opposing things. Unless, of course, you are amenable to being re-educated like most native speakers of modern Israeli. So lastly, we have this verse, Zephaniah 3:9. For then I will turn the people a pure language, that they may call upon the name of Yahuwah to serve him with one consent. Basically, we know that Yahuwah will be the one who brings the pure language back. And while it would be easy to follow suit until such time as that, the very least we could do is, even if we don't have the pure language and we don't have complete 100% all the answers to what Scriptural Hebrew is, we definitely know what Hebrew is not. Thank you for watching the video with me today. While the credits roll, I hope that you'd be willing to think about it. Watch the video, more than once, because there's a lot of information. This really took me a long time to compile. I read 4 books cover to cover. I perused another 3, and that's not even including doing the scriptures and making sure that the words were correct in Scriptural Hebrew. So thank you so very much. Thank you for being patient, and I hope that you enjoy. Shalom.